Deputy Chairman Fred Hampton of the Illinois Black Panther Party.
Repeat after me. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary. I am a revolutionary.
You're looking at 18 months for the stolen car, 5 years for impersonating a federal officer, or you can go home.
The Black Panthers are forming a rainbow coalition of oppressed brothers and sisters of every color.
Their aim is to sow hatred and inspire terror.
I will learn all that I can.
These ain't no terrorists.
You can murder a liberator, but you can't murder liberation. You can murder a revolutionary, but you can't murder revolution. And you can murder a freedom fighter, but you can't murder freedom.
Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association. And today at AAFCA Roundtables, we have an exciting treat for you. We have the creators responsible for the upcoming Warner Media project, Judas and the Black Messiah, Shaka King, the director of the project, and a good friend of AAFCA's, Charles King, who is the producer. We're going to start off by introducing you to our panelists taking part in our call today, starting with Sharronda Williams in Atlanta, Ronda, Racha, Penrice in Atlanta, Brandon Collins in Queens, New York, Kathia Woods, our facilitator in Philadelphia, Carolyn Hinds in Toronto, Mercendez Springer in Atlanta, Rebecca Ford in cold Chicago, and Emmanuel Noisette also in Chicago. I'm gonna let you guys do what you do so well, and I will see you on the other side.
Hi everyone, Sharronda Williams, prepare, wait. This question is going to be both for Shaka and Charles, but Shaka, we could start with you. With someone with such an impressive legacy, such as Fred Hampton, who accomplished so much at such a young age before he was assassinated, I really wanted to ask you from a production standpoint, the reasoning or how hard of a decision was it to really focus on such a short period of Fred Hampton's life, especially this man who many of us know about, but we really haven't seen him portrayed within the media outside of documentaries. And Shaka, we could start with you.
Yeah, sure. I think it was, the reasons were kind of multifold to really focus on one year. I think for starters, it's just too expansive a story to tell in the framework of a traditional biopic. And there's just too much story. I think the only way you could really tell his story in full is with a limited series. And you might even need more than one season, quite frankly. You could probably just do a season on the trial following his assassination alone. And so that was one reason. I mean, I think sort of the bigger, in many ways, the bigger reason, and Charles can speak to this after, because I think he has even more expertise in this realm, is that there was no way Hollywood was going to make a Fred Hampton biopic, in a traditional Fred Hampton biopic, just because, Hollywood has zero awareness of Fred Hampton until this movie. I think you don't even have a Louis Armstrong biopic. There are Black people on stamps who don't have biopics. So, for me, one of the things that intrigued me immediately in hearing the Lucas brothers pitch in terms of framing this as an undercover movie is I was like, oh, we can make this, But Charles, you can piggyback off of that as well.
It was also we wanted this movie on the heart of telling the story to also be commercial and to be a story that would really resonate, with a global audience. And the the whole perspective and point of view that Shaka and Will's script had, really, we thought accomplished, some of everything. You had the thriller aspect of, and a cat and mouse game sort of, departed in tone, but then he also had the historical context and the real work and the mission of the party and what Chairman Fred Hampton was doing, all with the kind of backdrop of, COINTELPRO there behind the kind of manipulation of the informant and just the global work that they were trying to do to quell the revolution. And I think all of those elements together and the way that their script and Shaka's vision for telling it really spoke to us. And we couldn't have been more excited about, being part of it. We thought they had a great balance of that and how they were going to tell the story.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Hi, everybody. Brandon Constant, Media and Popcorn Podcast. I wanted to hear from you all about the difficulties in kind of getting this film together and keeping your vision. What were some of the challenges you both faced? And Shaka, we can start with you again.
The great fortune I had, is that, like I say to people, I'm like, it's easy to win the championship when you're playing with the 97 Bulls, So to start with, I had, Ryan Coogler and Charles King, as producers on this film. And, we had the same politic in terms of the integrity in not even desire, but it wasn't even a conversation. That's how just like, we were on the same page, like there was never any conversation about whitewashing his words or ideas. I remember, when people saw the trailer, folks, I think quite frankly, rightfully assuming that, we were gonna like portray Fred Hampton as a liberal, and not at all acknowledge his, socialist and Marxist Leninist politics. And that was never even a consideration for us. And so, the hurdles really for me personally as a filmmaker, were really learning how to collaborate with my producers and with the studio, because I'd never been through a development process before. I'd only come from indie film and television, and television's a writer's medium. So you go into television knowing, well, I have no control over this anyway. And when you've been doing that for years, as I have, and you've been dying to make another movie, like, yeah, I can't wait to make a movie again, because then it'll be mine, but it's not just yours, and that was something that took me really the process of making this movie to learn. I knew how to collaborate with, a cast. I knew how to collaborate with a crew, but to collaborate with my producers in the studio to develop this piece of material was a learning process that made me a far better artist than I was prior.
Yeah, I would also say too that, in terms of making sure that the vision for the movie was seen through, Shaka was one of the things. Shaka had a vision for who he wanted in this movie, and he's talked about this in a lot of conversations, but I believe he got his dream cast of everybody that he was really focused on. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on and the mission of our company, Macro, is to support artists with like Shaka, and making sure that their vision and the authenticity of their work is supported, which is why we raise capital to try to come to a place where we're at the seat of the table. This wasn't only Warner Brothers. It was actually, when the movie got greenlit, more of the money, more of the equity came from Macro. Now, they were our partners, and they were great partners, and we had an amazing executive who has a real, Nija Kuykendall, I'm sure you guys all know, who, without her, she was such an amazing just advocate and got it from day one. But it was really making sure that his vision, and he'd worked in independent film, was fully realized, both from his cinematic lens as an artist, but also the potential of reaching a wide global audience, which is what he said in those very first meetings. He was like, I'm not looking to make a small independent movie. I want this movie to be seen globally. And so as his producers, that was, Ryan has such a populist commercial lens, but he's also a filmmaker. And we were able to use his strengths from there, Shaka's vision, our capital and experience from being in the industry on the executive side. And really, it was the village that came together with all of our teams, to make sure that his vision wasn't compromised, which I really believe in this case was not.
Yeah, I 100% agree.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Mercedes here with She Critiques in Atlanta. Speaking of your cast, Shaka, they talked about how this film stretched them emotionally and spiritually in the making of it. And I'm just wondering how it impacted you on the other side of the lens watching this, and how did you encourage your cast in those emotionally challenging days?
I'm still kind of unpacking the way that it impacted me, because I sat with it so much longer than them, researching and writing it. Like, I remember when the pandemic hit, and a lot of people I knew, close friends I had, were, kind of going through a dark phase. And I was like, oh, I've been in a dark phase, And so, I'm still sort of unpacking how it affected me in terms of being there for them. I recognize the challenge that actors have just acting, performing, and inhabiting, really, a different person in front of a bunch of, what feels, eventually you a crew and a cast form a familial relationship, but essentially you're performing in front of a bunch of strangers. You're naked, you have lights on, you have a camera in your face. It's very challenging. And it's all the more challenging when you're talking about, an icon and someone like Fred Hampton, a living icon and someone like Akua Njeri, formerly known as Deborah Johnson. But I would always tell Lakeith, who for me personally had the most difficult job on set, that he was making the greatest sacrifice, because his job was thankless. And his only reason for saying yes to this role was because he thought it was important that this story get out there and that, Fred's words and ideas be put forth into the world. But he gets no rewards for that, and so I would remind him of that, in those days when he was really, really going through it. And, I hope to help in the moment,
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Good morning, guys. Kathia Woods, Cup of Social. My question is for you, Shaka. Talk a little bit about the information gathering, because even as I was writing my piece, it was very hard to get information specifically on William O'Neal. There's no documentation because his interaction with the FBI was off the books. So talk about how were you able to, how did you navigate that space?
So there's the Eyes on the Prize 2 interview, the transcript of that I had for years. So I that was like, we did detective work, Will and I, and it was fun to do that. Like, I was scrubbing that interview for clues into, who this person was and the way that he thought. The fact that he used an FBI badge to, steal a car as opposed to, more traditional means, that gave us a clue into the way that he thought, and just like his fondness of manipulation, and how, it was a lot of it was about the sport more so than about the acquisition of the thing he wanted, right? There was a book called The Badge They're Trying to Bury that was written by this cop who William O'Neal later framed of murder when William O'Neal became a drug dealer, when he started dealing drugs out at the gas station that Roy Mitchell helped him acquire. That book was like an $800 book, and I bought it because, I needed to know. And it gave me some insight into William O'Neal and gave me some insight into his relationship with Roy Mitchell. But a lot of it was, ultimately doing the job of a writer, which is like, an actor acts in front of a camera. But I remember when John Singleton came to visit, I went to NYU, and Spike Lee was one of my teachers, and John Singleton came to visit our class, and he talked about writing Boys in the Hood in film school and how he was in the computer lab acting out all the roles while he was writing it. And that's what you do as a writer, and that's what we were doing. And that's how we found William O'Neal, is we ultimately had to put ourselves in that kind of headspace and think about, okay, let's give these actions context. How does one come to these decisions?
Thank you so much. Great film.
No problem. Thank you.
Hi, Carolyn for So Here's What Happened podcast. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. So, Shaka, my question is for you, and it has to do with how the script and the story is framed in a biblical sense, because like the name is Judas and the Black Messiah. So obviously you're referring to Judas Iscariot and Jesus, but also could you tell me about the other characters? Because I kind of saw Roy Mitchell as Pontius Pilate and Deborah's character as Mary Magdalene. So could you tell me about framing the story in that sense, giving it a biblical undertone?
You know, we didn't. The funny thing is that the movie was only named Judas and the Black Messiah long after we'd shot and edited and all that stuff. You know, the Panthers were actually quite adamant about us not really leaning, because the original title was Jesus Was My Homeboy. Because the truth of the matter is that we read, everything I read about Fred Hampton really did portray him as almost a saint-like figure, you know, which, you know, obviously he wasn't, but that was just, it was just remarkable to find that, like, you really can't just like find character flaws with this individual, you know? And, you know, the Panthers were really adamant that, you know, we really avoid any references to, you know, religious figures. I mean, even Judas and the Black Messiah was a stretch for them. It took a lot of conversations and massaging because that just didn't align with their politics. So it's just a coincidence that you sort of came to those conclusions.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Ford, and I'm in Chicago. So I write for the Chicago Daily Law Bulletin and WCPT, which is Progressive Talk Radio. And so I guess my question kind of follows up on what you were saying, because, you know, Bobby Rush and them, a lot of those people are still around town. So, you know, what kind of interaction did you have with them in developing the movie, and how did they respond when you screened it for them and that kind of thing?
Yeah. So, you know, in addition to Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. and Akuna Jerry, I found a way. It was tough to get in touch with as many Illinois chapter members as I possibly could. You know, several had no interest in speaking with me, and I respected that, and, you know, did everything I could to avoid, you know, just furthering any interaction with them. But some did. You know, Lynn French was, I think, the first Illinois chapter member that I spoke with. And, you know, she introduced me in turn to Joanne McCarty, who introduced me to Michael McCarty. You know, they introduced me to Donna Dixon. And I also ultimately got a chance to speak with Blair Anderson, who was actually one of the survivors of the assassination. And he and I have been in dialogue actually quite a bit since 2018. And so, you know, they were, I mean, it was, besides, like I flew to Chicago. I spoke with all of them on the phone, but I also flew to Chicago for, you know, a few research trips and was able to interview them in person. And, you know, those conversations were very formative. You know, they affirmed a lot of things that I'd read. They also contradicted a lot of things that I read. And you know, it was just, I mean, it was just like there's no substitute for oral history, you know.
I'm particularly interested in Bobby Rush.
We didn't get so we reached out to Bobby Rush many times via Lynn French. We reached out to Bobby Rush and we heard from his people, but we never got a chance to speak with him personally. I know that he's seen the film, and I don't want to speak for him. I've heard from other people his thoughts, but I haven't had a conversation with him personally. So I would never want to, you know, speak on his behalf, but I have heard that he has seen the film.
I'd also just add that in addition to all those, the people that this former members or members that Shaka talked to, that even in our process of getting to know Chairman Fred Hampton Jr., as well as Mother Akua, those meetings at the home, the Hampton home, where Chairman Fred Hampton grew up, that they had their counsel in those meetings, and they were members of the party. They were very much a part of the vetting process as we were looking before we started making the movie, when we were still in the development phase and hoping that we would get their blessing, as well as we had a number of other party members come and visit, you know, while we were shooting, you know, as guests. and including current members of the Cubs, Black Panther Party Cubs with Chairman Fred. There's a coalition of them that actually came and were part of some of our production in some scenes. Is you really kind of showing how they were, aligned with their excitement for this story about Chairman Fred Hampton being told. So there was definitely significant engagement when you say Shaka from all the key constituents that would engage with us.
Oh, thank you, Charles.
Yeah.
Hello, gentlemen. This is Emmanuel Noisette, E-Man from E-Man's Movie Reviews. Thank you so much for coming out today. In today's world of volatile politics, I suppose, you have a certain segment of people trying to miscategorize groups like Black Lives Matter into a terrorist organization, no different than the Black Panthers were treated back in the day. And I'm thinking specifically of that scene with Algie Smith and the police. Do you believe that the perception of the Black Panthers might be compromised in any way by these same political talking heads because of those scenes?
I mean, I don't think that, I would say no, just because those talking heads have had the same agenda, for decades. And, they're going to seize upon, I've never done this before. You know what I mean? I've never made something that a lot of people have seen and then have asked me questions about it. It's my first experience doing it. And, I haven't had a lot of time to read how those interviews have turned out, but I've glanced at a few. And when you go through that process, you recognize that the same way that, myself and my editor, Kristen Sprague, we shape the story, we shape the narrative, no matter what the actors do, the writer of this material shapes the narrative. So it's always interesting to me, like the quotes that they choose and how those quotes can completely shape, what I say, right? And so having that understanding, I don't think that there's almost very little control you have once the movie's made. And the truth of the matter is, right, that if we hadn't shown the Jake Winters shootout with the police, if we kept that from the historical record, if we kept that piece of the historical record out of the movie and not included it, those same talking heads would have accused us of sanitizing, the Black Panthers militancy, and so it's a catch-22. When you step into this history, which is a volatile history, which is a complex history, the only thing you owe it is to present that full complexity. And then people will do with it what they will, just as they can go and, chop those scenes up and just focus on, the scenes, focus on the shootouts in the movie. Yeah, you're forgetting the last shootout. Let's talk about that one,
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. My name is Thomasina. My outlet is Music Movies Thoughts out of Philadelphia. Congratulations on the movie. This is a very, very wonderful project. I want to ask you both, and Shaka, you can start. Chairman Fred Jr. had mentioned in a previous interview that this film was getting information out without compromising his father's legacy. I want to ask, what was the conversation like with he and his mother? What parts of that legacy was most important for them to see reflected on the screen?
Charles, you want to start that one off? Because you had many ongoing conversations with him on set as well,
Well, there were certain things that they were absolute certain. This must be accurate. And then there were areas that were a little bit gray. And the lengths that we went to included a couple of occasions of literally line by line, word by word, going through the script over an entire weekend. And this is with Chairman Fred Hampton, Ryan Coogler, our producing partner, and the other members of the proximity team, Seb Ohanian and Zenzi, as well as myself. Shaka was in and out through some of it, but he was also prepping to make the movie and was shot listing. And so he was part of that there were certain things that they were just insistent on, but we came to a great kind of resolve of the bulk of what was most important, and the heart of it was there. And they really, I believe, saw the purity of our intentions for making this movie, and that so much more of the positive things were being told, that we're going to stand by his legacy, and that the creative license part, they were okay with. And one of the things we did to work through that was actually a brilliant idea by our partners at Proximity, was actually do a complimentary podcast called On the Record that's going to come out alongside of the movie, that's going to get more into historical accuracy of the legacy for Chairman Fred Hampton, and sort of details where we can say, hey, this is what happened in the movie, but this is what happened actually during that period of time. And so it was that balance that I think was helpful in getting them comfortable with it. But it was a delicate all day long for 41 days.
And exactly, that's key. And I'd say even beyond, you know, it's been a constant negotiation throughout the filmmaking process, even through the post process of like, you know, just conversations and discussions about what's possible. I mean, something as simple, like we just were talking about this, how the early drafts before we brought the script to Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. had reflected, you know, a friendship, a borderline friendship between William O'Neill and Fred Hampton, because the story that we'd heard, the historical record was such that it said William O'Neill was Fred Hampton's bodyguard. We learned later that was not true. He was not Fred Hampton's bodyguard. He was a member of the security cadre, and Fred Hampton would never allow him to be his bodyguard because William O'Neill was reactionary and was unreliable, you know? Even if they didn't know he was an FBI informant, he wasn't equipped to be Fred Hampton's bodyguard. And so that was information that came to us from Chairman Fred Hampton Jr. that we had to say, okay, well, this completely changes the direction that we've been going with these drafts. We have to, and if you look at the movie, you'll notice there are no scenes with just O'Neill and Fred Hampton alone. There are no scenes with them alone. There's no, when they do forge a connection, it's just, I mean, really, honestly, it's smoke and mirrors, it's trickery that we're engaging in a lot of ways. The movie has much more in common with a film like Heat, where you're charting two individuals on their own separate journey, and it's about their journeys converging, than it is about a friendship between these two guys. And that the only way the only reason we went, and I think it's a more powerful way of telling the story, but it's also the true story, and we only got the true story from Fred Hampton Jr.
Thank you very much.
No problem.
Hey guys. Keeping on with Mr. O'Neill, in the film, he seems more conflicted than any of the information that I personally could find that indicated such. Like in the things that are available to the public, he seemed not bothered at all. So how did you find that, or what was the decision in painting him in the way that he comes across?
Well, I mean, I don't agree with you. When you look at the Eyes on the Prize 2 interview, when you read it, I saw the inner conflict in the text. When you see it, you truly see the conflict. I mean, just the fact that, you know, he didn't take his sunglasses off for the first 45 minutes of the interview. When you look at the transcript, he's asked multiple times about the assassination. He's like, I can't talk about it. When you see it, you see he's saying I can't talk about it because it clearly gets to him. The fact that he took his own life the night that the series aired was a real clue into how, you know, despite the fact that he walked away from this with several $100,000 in his pocket, and the fact that he had two phones in his car in the 70s, which you don't get, you know, if you don't have quite a bit of money. And it still took his own life the night that the series aired. The fact that he begged to be a pallbearer at his funeral. The fact that he apparently cried the hardest at his funeral. And I think a lot of those were crocodile tears and him covering his scent. But this is, I think I found myself judging him for the first, like I said, 6 drafts of this script and just painting him as this sociopath. But I think it's a lot more complex than that. And he's a lot more complex than that. And ultimately, I don't think that the movie portrays him as sympathetic, but I do think that it gives some context to the decisions he made. And, you know, as I said earlier, like, people ask me if he's a victim, right? And I think that they're asking if he's a victim of the state, in the sense that, you know, here's a person who was manipulated by the FBI. But I actually think his victimhood starts a lot earlier than that, because I think his victimhood starts when he was, you know, born into a certain socioeconomic status and taught to desire a certain lifestyle that he couldn't possibly achieve and attain, you know, through normal means. It's like he's a victim of capitalism ultimately, you know, as many of us are, you know, and he was not able to hear. I think the thing about him that's interesting is, like, because we wrestled with this, like, Fred is arguably the greatest communicator of all time, able to get people to listen to him and believe in what he was saying. The question I would ask was, did William O'Neill ever believe what he was saying? And I do think that he probably, I know for a fact, he never was politicized. But the fact that his life ended the way that it did, I have to believe that Fred touched him in some way. His words touched him in some way, in some regard. So I that's why we made the decisions that we made, you know, in terms of the way that we framed him, you know.
I would just add to that, Ronda. It's good to see you, Aunt Ronda, as always. I mean, we definitely, as Shaka said, I mean, we heavily discussed it and debated it through numerous drafts, and we wanted to make sure, you know, they had the cinematic commercial side of the film, but we also wanted to make sure he was, you engage with the character, you know, but we also wanted to be the right blend of the conflict, but is he acting? Is he performing? Is he actually truly taking this in and being politicized? And you're not really sure. And I thought that we found the right balance between all of that, but there were numerous conversations as to how far to go. And definitely Chairman Fred Hampton Jr.
Yeah, I mean, the truth of the matter is that, like, if you look at the movie, he doesn't really display any conflict. There's no chance of him. He's very obviously not at all politicized for 3/4 of the film, and there's only a very brief moment, right? It's after, you know, the headquarters is firebombed, right? And, you know, he is the handyman, and this is based on historical record that he was the handyman, right? And that, you know, I've heard Panthers say, when did they get firebombed? Like, yeah, O'Neill did do a lot of the rebuilding, you know, and the community did come out. And for me, that's an opportunity for him as a character to see the community in action, to see Fred's words, power anywhere there's people, in practice, and for it to literally have a direct effect on just the work he has to do, because he was a handyman, but he was a lazy handyman, right? So that's an opportunity for a little bit of, just a glimmer of, okay, maybe there's a little bit of truth to what this guy is saying. And then Fred gets out of prison and he puts his arm around O'Neill in this way that he hasn't before, because Fred's at his most vulnerable place, right? He thought potentially his comrades were dead. He has no information other than the fact that his building has been bombed and his organization is in danger. And he gets out and he sees they rebuilt it and this dude helped lead the charge, and he thanks him. And there's a personal connection in that moment where it's the first time in the whole movie, and we're like probably, you know, almost 3/4 of the way in, where like O'Neill's emotionally affected, and it's a brief moment, and then he finds out that one of his comrades has been murdered, you know, and then you're in the middle of this speech, Fred's most rousing speech, and there's a moment in that scene where it's okay, maybe it's finally getting through to him, and then Mitchell's right there to be like, nah, no, not at all, no chance of that. And that's the only time. I mean, like, besides that, you never even get there's no potential for O'Neill buying into what Fred is saying, you know? the rest of the regret that you see on the back half of the movie is regret that I feel existed just based upon, that I was in the Prize 2 interview, where, I don't think this guy didn't start out as a murderer. He started out as a car thief. He then was asked to murder. And I think anyone who's not a murderer, when they're asked to murder, has conflict about that stuff.
Thank you. I did read in Bobby Rush's an interview he gave 10 years ago that O'Neill was a very handy person, and that was one of the ways in which he was able to kind of find some grace within the party.
Yeah.
Charles, Shaka, thank you so much for participating and talking with our members today. On behalf of the world's largest group of Black critics, we thank you for watching and have a great day.
Thank
Judas
you.
and the
Nice
Black
talking to
Messiah will open in theaters and also on HBO Max on February 12th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, y'all.